Perfect.
And we are recording. Hello, Daniel Grimes. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited. I'm really excited. How's lockdown treating you? How was your flight back to the UK?
The flight back was interesting. It's interesting to see how exactly the UK is dealing with the situation. I don't know if it is what it is. But yeah, no, I'm all good. It's a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to see your face in particular. So,
oh, bless you. You don't mean it. You don't mean it. You just it's just because you know you're being recorded. You want to create this nice guy, kind of thing. So let's go straight into it then. So before we talk about the industry you work in, I want to take it back to before you started your role. It comes to deciding what university you want to study at and what course you want to study. Can you talk me through the kind of decision-making process in that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would actually say I'm going to take it back even a little bit further for you. For me, that decision was not specifically made prior to that, but certainly the thinking, the theory towards it was really when I was quite young. My dad used to say to me a lot, really, when you first start going into work, you're going to choose one of two avenues. You're either going to choose something you like to do or something that you know is going to make you a lot of money. Obviously, as you get further into your industry, there's potential to marry both of them to be able to make lots of money at something you love. Or if you're fortunate enough to be, for example, something like a professional footballer, then obviously that's a win-win. But for most of us, it's one of the two. And that's always really played on my mind when thinking about different options to pursue careers in. I think that even from leaving the secondary school, because obviously, as you know, I moved secondary school to go and be part of a football program. And it was really there where I realized, well, I'm never going to make it as a professional footballer, but I would love to be within the industry. I would love to, work within football every day because that's what makes me happy. And I value that more over certainly initially making lots of money. So when it came to decisions in terms of, picking universities and courses, really, I always focused around my two biggest passions, if you like, which was football and politics. And eventually football came out on top for me in that regard. And that's how I ended up at the University of South Wales studying football coaching and performance.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, because I mean, I was going to ask actually, because obviously I know you really well. We've been really good mates for years now, years and years and years. I know obviously you, like, in my opinion, you're a very intelligent guy. You are, and I was going to ask, there must have been at some point other career options for you,
Yeah, so actually straight out of school, I don't know if you know this, from Huxlow even, which was the secondary school that obviously both you and I went to, I was actually sort of in talks with a role at Barclays Bank who wanted me to come in and be part of, they had like a program. My dad actually knew the guy who, I guess I can't really say too much about what he is, but knew a guy at Barclays who was prepared to offer me, based on my academic performance, a role which potentially would have, over the course of the last sort of 5-6 years, potentially seen me in a really good spot within a position in Barclays Bank. And then, yeah, like I said, again, obviously being mates with each other for a long time, you know this about me. I love my politics as well. And that's one of the things that I did an A level in. I achieved an A in that A level as well. So I did well enough to go to universities and study politics further. But yeah, like I said, for me, it was more the case of what am I going to enjoy doing the most. And for me, both politics and football was about, can I mold, can I shape people, can I help people, or certainly children specifically. And I love the idea of being able to work with children sort of every day.
Yeah.
Not all of them I'm going to make professional footballers, but if I can have an impact on their lives and do it through the medium of football, for me, that's a fantastic way to go.
And that must be incredibly rewarding as well. To be able to do a job where you know that you're impacting the lives of others that could go on and do great things. That must be incredibly rewarding for you.
Yeah, so like I was going to say motto, it's not really a motto, but something that we talk about a lot, especially at Juventus Bahrain, is about growing people before players.
Yeah.
If you look at the statistics of players that make it into professional footballers, in terms of the 92 league academies, I believe that are professional academies that are in the UK currently, it's like 0.0015% of them ever make it into professional football. So it's a
Wow.
tiny percentage of people that will ever actually make it, but they're all 100% of them are going to be adults, and so it's important for them to have those life skills, to have that bit of knowledge. So if I can positively impact them in terms of how they grow as young people, then that's as important, if not more important, than what I give them in terms of a footballing education.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. So you decided to study at the University of South Wales. Quite a big step away from obviously where we grew up in Northamptonshire. How did you? Obviously, I know we're going to come on to you making a bigger step in your career later on. But at this stage, how did you find that step of making that move?
I've never really been like, I was going to say sentimental. Maybe sentimental was not the right word. I never attached necessarily to our hometown. I love where I live. I always loved Huxlow. I love being at Southfield, which is where I went afterwards. And I've lived in Earthenborough and Wellingborough now as well. I've always loved those places. It's never been a case of really desperately wanting to get away. But at the same time, the opportunities that I had, or the opportunities that were available, were further afield. And for me, it was a logical way of thinking rather than an emotional one of the best place for me to go to further this career, to get a start on this career, is the University of South Wales. Looking at all the options that I had, I felt that was the best choice. So that's what I went for. It was made a little bit easier, I guess, by the fact that I'm actually relatively familiar with Cardiff and with Wales, because I had family that lived there. But for me, there was never, it was always about, what does the course provide me? What am I going to get out of it? And that's how I made that decision, really.
Yeah, no, fair play. So obviously, I imagine you had a really great time at university. So
well, you visited.
I did, and I had a fantastic weekend. I can't go into the details for this interview, but wow, what a weekend!
Beautiful place.
So that transition then from university into your current role. So first of all, I think let's tell people what your role is and where you work.
Okay, so I'm an academy coach at Juventus Academy Bahrain. In terms of what my role entails, we have kids from ages 3 to 18, and we also have a women's program which I head up. We don't have a men's program currently. There's no option really for that. But yeah, so I'm coaching every day. Our working week is from Sunday to Thursday. We have Fridays as a day off, and then Saturdays will be games and matches, tournaments, things like that. But yeah, 3 sessions a day. We run over 2 locations in Bahrain now as well, which is pretty exciting, as the second location is new to us. And we're an official academy of Juventus Football Club. Means we follow their methodology, we follow their guidelines, all that sort of stuff. So obviously a really prestigious place, I guess, or a prestigious, certainly, club to be able to work for and learn from. And the guys that I work with, very, very experienced guys, spent a lot of years at different clubs, have lots of different qualifications. So yeah, really fantastic place to be at. I forgot what the question. I don't know if there was a question.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to
it's just that's what I do. And yeah, like I said, for me, my main role is the youth academy and coaching the kids. I get to see the range of kids. I'm not so some countries, I don't know, again, if you know, some countries' academy systems have specific age group coaches. So you will always coach the under 12s, for example. When the under 12s are on, they go to the under 13s age group coach. You have the new batch of under 12s. In Bahrain, it doesn't work that way. It's more like the UK, where really I can change between multiple age groups, and including having the women's team who actually play in the Bahraini Women's Premier League.
Wow, that's cool.
Something I love everything. I love everything about it. To be honest, I would keep talking about it.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, this wasn't a question I've got prepared, but it's come to my mind. You know, it must feel so surreal to say that you work for Juventus Football Club. And the reason I say that is because obviously in our group of friends, you know, and many sort of lads our age around the country, you know, football is such a huge part of our culture, and you know, just to say that you work for Juventus Football Club must feel really surreal for you to say that.
Yeah, and honestly, because for me personally, obviously, I don't know how long the list of in terms of alphabet celebrities. You know, you have A-list, B-list. Like, I'm not even a Z-list celebrity. There'll be never anything like that about it. But because of who I'm associated with, people want to take pictures of you. They, you know, if you're in airports and things with you know, with your teams and things like that, people want to take pictures of you. They want to interview you. They want to ask you questions about that sort of stuff. And so you almost have like this sort of weird and potentially even weirder than being famous yourself, because then it's your achievements. I'm almost the people want me for the badge that's on my chest. It's like it is really, really weird. But in terms of in general, to have spent, I spent a week in Turin with people there, top Juventus guys. Was fantastic. Really, really taught me a lot. That was February, so just before this whole thing kicked off.
Yeah.
But yeah, to be there, to be in amongst those guys that you know are some of the top people in their game, you don't necessarily, and you're talking to them and they're talking to you like, you know, we're friends, we're, you know, equals almost. And these guys are really, you can, like, it sounds stupid to say, but you can purchase them on Football Manager and things like that. They're 5-star rated, and I'm here just talking to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a sort of silly example to use, but at the same time, it's like, well, hang on, what do you mean that this is the same guy that I was just talking to? And he's like, and like I said, it's not just a professional football club. The Juventus Football Club has always been almost one of the top 10 clubs in the world, potentially you'd say top 5 clubs in the world. That's an incredible thing to be able to say, 100%.
And it's nice to hear that there is that mutual respect, like you were saying. You know, you're talking to coaches and people that, like you said, you can find on Football Manager, which is quite like weird in itself, you know. But the fact that there is already that mutual respect there, that's really nice to hear. You know, as someone not in the football industry.
Yeah, no, they treat you like you were any other coach that would come to them. Really fantastic stuff.
That's great. That's fantastic. So the transition then, Wales coming before, the transition from University of South Wales into your current role, just talk me through that.
Well, it sort of started between my first year and my second year. So obviously we had the sort of summer break, and I went and worked in America for it was actually a summer camp called Camp Echo Lake. Really, again, loved the experience there. That was kind of my first sort of full-time role, I guess, in coaching. Obviously, it was only for a limited period, but it was every day that I was coaching, and also it was quite a wide variety of kids. Obviously, in America, women's soccer is huge, men's soccer not so much. So you had a really weird sort of balance where some of the girls groups that you would get would be unbelievable, and then some of the boys groups that you get would be pretty basic, pretty sort of amateur level. Which is obviously not obviously, but certainly in some cases is the inverse to what you'd see maybe in the UK, where women's football is not given the same amount of time, and it's not at the level of the men's football, for example. So yeah, it started there, and absolutely loved that role in terms of what I was doing there. So I did my second year at university, and I met a couple of great guys. I can mention their names, Rob and were absolutely fantastic to me through that year. I worked with them in actually a couple of different roles, including in women's football in Wales and youth football at county level in Cardiff. And my time with them, I think, as well as the course itself, really pushed me towards, you know, if there's an opportunity that comes up, I'd really love to be able to do this every day. And in the UK, those opportunities are really, really few and far between. Even academy coaches in the top clubs, a lot of them are part-time, a lot of them are PE teachers on the side, or they do other things as well as that. It's only really when you get up to the sort of higher levels or the older age groups, for example, so you're under 18s, 19s, 21s, obviously the first team, do these guys start becoming a little bit more full-time and professional coaches. but I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. And it just so happened that I was actually on my way down to a session in Newport when I was, well, no, sorry, I wasn't on my way down. I was there, and I was just waiting. I was there about an hour and a half early, and I was just flicking through my LinkedIn, and I saw an advert from one of my contacts that said there's this opportunity going. I was actually not underqualified for the role, but there were, so you have the basic requirements of the role, and then you have the desirables. I didn't necessarily meet all of the desirables, but I had an interview with who was my now boss, Andrew, and I guess he liked me. I deferred my course for a year. So the initial plan was to stay in Bahrain for 1 year. And basically it was just a case of, I loved my time so much in Bahrain and doing that, that when the opportunity the following summer came up and they said, look, if you want to come back, because I'd actually come back home already and I was starting my university sort of stuff again, finding a house and things like that to live. The opportunity came up to go back, and they didn't actually even offer it to me to begin with, because they assumed that I was, set on university. And they actually asked me if I knew anyone who would be suitable. And I said, well, guys, if you want me back, I'm actually really interested in that. And they said, yeah, of course, we'd love to have you back. And
Fantastic.
And it's there now. I'm into my, technically due to Corona, this is the end of the third season that I've been here. And I'll be going back in September, hopefully, to continue on.
Fantastic. So it's your final year of university. Is that still deferred now then? How's that work?
I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't actually know. What I did was I tried to apply for the deferral, but I know from the first year that I did that, it says only a year. You're only allowed to do that for a year. You know how people take gap years and things like that.
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah.
I really take a gap 5 years for those sort of things. I assume, and maybe wrongly, I assume that the opportunity, if it were, or if I wanted to, that I could go back, I would obviously just have to go back at probably more a start level again and redo those 2 years. But that was something for me. It was like the opportunity to be a full-time coach, to work at that level, to work with those people would be as beneficial as my last year at university.
Yeah.
And if I had continued that last year at university, probably at the end of it, I'd be coming out and looking for the exact same job anyway. So why not take it there while it's now, while it's there now, while that opportunity is there? Because ultimately, I guess the theory behind going to university and gaining those extra qualifications is that you get the job that you want at the end of it. If my job's already here, then why continue? Do you know what I mean? So maybe not a usual strategy for most people. Most people might have wanted to continue on with their studies and get that finished first. But I took that leap, and at the moment, it's paying out well for me. Whether it will in the future, I guess we'll see.
It's really interesting. I mean, the reason I've asked that is because obviously a lot of students would probably be in the mindset, if they had that sort of opportunity, that they would want to finish off their uni degree, because it's quite it's quite scary, isn't it? Because that must have been quite a scary sort of decision to make, because I suppose you're faced with, yes, you'll have that job. Obviously, at the time it was for a year, but then after that, what happens to the degree? And it must have just been quite a scary decision to make.
I don't think I was ever necessarily. I could understand. I would totally understand people's views and people that would want to continue on their studies. 100%. I totally see that viewpoint. For me, I guess I'm in a privileged position to not have to be scared by that. I knew that if push came to shove, and even right now, if for some reason the academy couldn't continue, or I had to leave the job for whatever reason, I know that I can come back, that I still have a certain amount of qualifications, I still have a certain amount of knowledge and experience that I can look to either go back onto that course. That's still an option for me. I'm still can be a resident in the UK, and also that I could potentially go and get other jobs off the back of basically my experience and the qualifications that I do currently have. So in a way, it's a bit of a leap, but also it's an easier leap to make when you know that, well, even if it all goes wrong, all that happens is I'm just pushing reset. And maybe that's cost me 2, 3, 4 years of my life in terms of like pursuing a career, but it's worth the risk. For me, that was worth the risk.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's very interesting. Thank you, obviously, for sharing this. So let's talk about the next big kind of leap then. So we've spoken about the transition from obviously Northamptonshire to Wales. Now you have the transition of Wales to Bahrain across the world. You know, so you talk me through that transition.
Um, Again, it's always, and I don't know if it's I imagine in some parts of my life it's a good thing, in some parts it's a bad thing. It was always just the logical decision. You know, if I wanted that job, I had to live in Bahrain. There was no, you know, there was no way to live in Northampton and commute 5 hours on a plane every day to my training. Do you know what I mean? So yes, it's a big jump, but also if you want to make that transition, if you want to take that job, if I wanted to take that opportunity, that's what had to come with it. In terms of the life itself, Bahrain is a really wonderful place. There's a huge expat community in Bahrain already anyway. A number of like school teachers and things like that. Most people speak English in Bahrain already. All of the sessions run in English. So it wasn't, yes, it's across the world, but it wasn't like going to a country where I would have to learn the language again, where I really wouldn't have anyone with similar interests. I knew straight away that wasn't going to be the case. We actually moved in, when I first went out there, I moved in with 4 other coaches at the time, all of whom were English speaking and you know, not necessarily had the exact same interest, but there were things that we could talk about, university, living in the UK and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of them that made the transition really, really easy. Like I said, the country itself, there are certain things that you have to respect. There are different things culturally, but nothing at which I would say, well, this is a problem for me, or this is something that I really can't do, or you know, there's never any that in fact, I love the local culture. I love the local food and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, it's come now more as a hindsight, I guess, because I didn't know that before I came. But
Yeah.
for me, like I said, I guess the initial jump was I have to do it to take the job. There's no other option. And since I have, it's honestly, it's been fantastic.
So you know, so you've taken the risk, and it's paid off essentially.
Yeah, like there are a few things obviously that always were going to happen, even including my contact with you and the other guys from school, including my family, all that sort of stuff. It is much more certainly limited than it would be had I managed to find a job in this area or even in the UK, because obviously, you know, even if I was still in Wales, Wales is only a 1-2 hour commute to most places. It's not really that far.
Yeah.
Whereas Bahrain, obviously, you have to get a flight. It's a 5-hour flight. It's actually longer than that. It's like 6-7 hours normally. But yeah, so there were some things that maybe I missed sometimes, but overall, I think when we live in this age, just being able to do what we're doing now, obviously, we're both in our own houses at the moment, able to communicate with each other. I speak to people regularly through social media and things like that. So yeah, I guess it's just a mindset of I'm going to have to make certain sacrifices to get this role, to make sure that I can be or have the job that I want to have, and then weighing it up, are those sacrifices worth it? And for me, again, it goes back to just a case of, even if university wasn't involved, the worst thing that would happen for me to go and take a role in Bahrain is that after a year I decide, well, I actually hate it here. I'm coming back home and basically I've just reset with just a year that I've lost. And obviously on the other hand, it's, well, I'm going to love it. And then potentially it's something that I could do for many, many years. So yeah, it was always worth the risk in that sense.
Okay, lovely. So moving on then, could you take us through a standard working day of Daniel Grimes? And I'm aware this is probably going to be very, very different day to day. But if you could do like a standardized daily routine, could you kind of talk through this?
For sure. So our working day is slightly different, I would imagine, from most other people. I normally get into the office. If we have full office hours on, because sometimes we might have to go into schools, sometimes there's other sort of administrative work, including, obviously equipment that we have sometimes needs to be fixed, needs to be purchased, all that sort of different stuff. So there are sometimes you can be away from the office and the pitch and doing other things. But if we were talking about a standard office day, we would normally come in around 11 a.m. And then from that point, we'll go through a number of different things. It might be our sessions for the day. It might be the curriculum in general that we're talking about. We actually have a few models that we have to go through and make sure that we are, all the sessions that we are delivering fit within that model, which is psychologically, socially, tactically, technically, all of those different things. They have to be adhered to. Obviously, there's room for maneuver within that, and as coaches, we are given freedom to explore those areas, but there is a framework for us. So sometimes we'll revise over that. Parents sometimes have to be contacted. There are things like player reports to do over the course of the year. So lots of different things that may come up, but yeah, at sort of 11 o'clock, we are expected to be in. From that point at 3 p.m., we will go and set up our sessions ready for 4 o'clock. Obviously, our sessions don't start until that time because kids are at school. So there is nothing really there are no sessions before that point. So yeah, sessions will start at 4. Most evenings will have 3 lots of sessions per day. So I'll do an hour 15 session. Then there'll be about a 15-minute break for me to set up again. Then there'll be another session, hour 15. Then there'll be a 15-minute break to set up again. Another session, hour 15. That's pretty much the typical day. Obviously, after that, I get to go home and do what I like from that point. Within the day, again, with the kids, you have to make sure that all of their details are correct, that they're signed up correctly, just in case, obviously, for health and safety reasons, for child protection reasons. We have to go through a number of different things with the kids. But yeah, other than that, that's sort of like because there's so many variables, there's not much more detail I can give you than that.
Of course. I understand it's obviously a very difficult question. I understand that, yeah.
Yeah, no, look, there are so many different things that we get to do and that I love being part of, like including just before we went to one of the schools and was part of their sports day in the morning and ran part of that with the kids, voluntary work. And I've also been writing or had been writing for the Gulf Weekly, which is an international newspaper in the Middle East. I've got a column that I do there, which is something that I'll do. Same with other voluntary work that we did. There was actually a period last year where I was getting up at like 4 a.m. in the morning to go and coach the varsity team at the local American school, because that's something they asked me to do. So we like to do things to get involved, partly because it helps us as well, because if people see that we are doing the right things within the community, then they're more likely to bring their children to us, which is what we want. We want every kid to be able to experience what we can deliver, what we can give them. And obviously, like I said, in terms of my goal in the beginning of being able to affect kids in that way and help mold them, for me, that's the perfect scenario. I'm just meeting more and more.
Yeah, fantastic. I have a question for you. So when you when you watch football or when you play football, or even when it comes to a smaller level of just doing things like playing pro clubs with myself and our friendship group and that, can you still enjoy football, if that makes sense? Or do you now, obviously due to your role, do you see things in a much more analytical sense?
I think that you can, or for me personally, I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone who's a football coach, but I think that there's an easier way within football to detract yourself from actually being analytical about something. You can just enjoy the moment within the game. What I would say is there's certainly far more of it that goes on just in general that you can't help yourself, right? You see particularly things like mistakes, or you see tactical decisions, and you have not necessarily an insight, but you're already looking for those things. You train your mind every day to look for those things, whether it be technical aspects, whether it be tactical aspects, physical aspects, all those different things. what I'd say about football, and what's great about football, is that actually a lot of people do that anyway, regardless of whether they're coaches or not, and whether or not their opinion makes sense or not. Some people, just say things for the sake of saying things, but everybody's trying to do it, and everybody wants to do it, and everyone's got a reason why their team lost at the weekend, or a reason why their team won at the weekend. So even without necessarily going into specific details, people's conversation sort of revolves around an analytical side of football. Why did you win? Why did you lose? Why is he a good signing? Why is he not a good signing? Was that too much money? All of these different things. Actually, when you break it down, all of it's sort of an analysis of the situation. Nobody's going really, or even if you're talking about, for example, a great goal. Well, why is it a great goal? It's a great goal because he scored it from here, or because he's used this technique, or so all of these different things you don't think of as being necessarily like in-depth analysis of the situation, but that is essentially what people are doing. They're giving an opinion based upon what they're looking at and what they're seeing. So if anything, it just gives me not an advantage, but it gives me a different point of view to insert into conversation, into and to formulate an opinion on those things.
That's a really interesting stance, because I know personally I've never thought like that really. I've never thought like that. Obviously, everyone, as you said, has an opinion on football. I mean, obviously some of us are more qualified than others. Obviously you're a lot more qualified to talk about football than anyone else in our friendship group, but yeah, like I said, it's a very interesting point you've brought up there. Moving on, this might be quite a difficult question. Are there any challenges that are facing football coaching at the moment? Are there any
so what, obviously with the current situation as it is, this is effectively, we have been ended at the moment. You cannot coach football currently with the pandemic that's occurring at the moment with COVID-19. So in effect, yes, that's a massive challenge. We literally cannot coach at the moment. I am currently in the UK, but normally at this time of the year, I would still be in Bahrain. We would still have, I believe, about 8 weeks left of our season. Yes, in terms of recovering football from this point onwards, it's going to be a challenge, because even when restrictions are lifted, even when everything goes sort of more back to normal, if you like, people are still going to be cautious. Naturally, people are still going to be cautious. And the thing with football academies is you have a large group of people congregating at almost all times during the 4 or 5 hours that we are there. There's going to be a lot of people, because there are 4 or 5 sessions going on, which all have 10, 15 kids, which all those kids have maybe a parent that comes and watches, or maybe even more than that. Some people bring 3, 4. I've seen a whole family of people turning up to a training session.
Wow.
So yeah, of course, in terms of if you want to restart at the moment, certainly with any social distancing or anything like that, it's going to be a massive challenge for us. I don't have anything in terms of what we're going to do specifically, because we're not even at a point where we can consider reopening.
Yeah.
In general, football coaching doesn't have a problem as an industry. It will, for me, it will always be there. Football has grown exponentially worldwide and has continued to grow for a number of years. And now obviously the big sort of injection is into women's football, certainly in this country, which I think is fantastic. As someone that gets to work in the women's game, hopefully we'll see that continue to grow as well. But that all comes under the umbrella of football coaching. I can go and coach in the women's game as well as the men's game. So for me, in terms of the opportunities that are around, actually they're not going away. What I would say about football coaching is that there is a lot of because, as we're referring back to the opinion, or not the opinion, the point about opinions of football, your coaching career is almost defined by who you surround yourself with and who you can be involved with. If you suddenly, for example, if a top flight manager called me up and said, look, Dan, I love what you've done. We're going to go, do you want to come work with me, on a first team level? Now, if the tactical output that team then delivers is really bad, or is not seen in a good light, you've almost got to rebuild, even as a coach myself, to be affiliated with that team, with that club, whatever. I've now got to rebuild. And football changes so dramatically and so constantly. Football played right now is not the same football that was played 10 years ago. It was not the same football that was played 20 years ago. So as a coach, I have to be evolving constantly to what the new trends are in the game, into what the new ideas are, the new philosophies are. So you have two real problems in that, or not necessarily problems, but two things that you have to be aware of as a football coach. One is that if you stand still, you go backwards 100%, and very, very quickly in football coaching. If you're still using physical conditioning techniques that were being used 25 years ago, you're almost certainly behind the curve. And then being innovative is not necessarily difficult if you're in the right place. So if you're at a top club and you're at a top level and you want to be innovative about certain things, you probably have the freedom to do so. If you're not at that level, then it's very difficult, because people will say to you straight away, well, this is how this works because we've produced this player or that player, or this is how football's been played in a certain way. Why would we suddenly change our techniques to what you're saying because you don't know what we know? Do you know what I mean? So unless you're right at the very top, innovation is sort of, well, how much can you get away with before somebody says, no, we're doing it my way because I'm higher than you, I've got more experience than you. And it's really an industry where obviously experience is very, very important and plays a big part. But at the same time, if your experience means that you're stuck in the ways that you have experienced over that course of time, then you're almost going to be a detriment rather than adding anything to a coaching team, because you're going to force these people to also be in that way. And if their formative years of coaching are stuck in a certain way, they're more likely as they progress to be in that way as well. And therefore not ruins their careers, but doesn't help them. Certainly doesn't help them.
Okay, that's very interesting. Do you have any advice for anyone that might be considering football coaching as a career?
So first of all, make sure you love it. Make sure you know that's what you want to do. There is a massive difference between being a football player and being a football coach. Then, the idea that because you love football coaching is not true. I've always taken an interest in teaching in general, and obviously I've alluded to it a couple of times now about teaching children has always been something that's really been on my mind. So I always knew that the step into football coaching was one that I was going to enjoy, but it certainly isn't for everyone. And in terms of hours and things like that you might have to do, or weekends you might have to do, whatever that, you have to be committed to it. So first of all, try it out. Get coaching badges, take up part-time roles, take up voluntary roles. Full-time roles in coaching are few and far between, especially in the UK, and if you're starting out, almost non-existent. If you have the opportunity to go and study, like I did at the University of South Wales, or at a university which offers similar sort of degrees or anything like that, and then just continue to learn in the best ways possible. I've been watching or listening to a number of actual Zoom calls, a bit like the one we're having now, with ex-pros, coaches at top teams. They're all doing these things at the moment. Now is a perfect time to be researching what are the best methods, and remembering that football coaching isn't just about what you do on the grass and where you put your cones down. It's, do you understand the psychological side of maybe either the children or the men or the women or whoever it is that you want to work with? Do you understand how their conditioning works? Do you understand, what types of coaching they're going to respond to? And there's lots of different things that you don't have to be an expert in sports nutrition or sports science necessarily, because you have other people for those things. But if you don't have any understanding of it, then potentially you're going to lead yourself and lead your players down an alley that they're not going to be able to return from, maybe with injuries, maybe with the style of play, maybe their understanding or the way they're learning, and especially with younger players in their formative years. So if I was to, I went on for a little while there, didn't it?
No, it's fine. It's interesting. Carry on.
In terms of advising, 100% coaching badges. Not necessarily that I believe coaching badges are the be-all and end-all, but what they do allow you to do is, if you get your level 1, level 2 in the FA, you can go and take up a few part-time roles. You're going to go and be able to take up voluntary roles. People will allow you to do those things much, much more quickly and much easier than if you don't have them. I think specifically what you learn on those courses isn't necessarily everything that you're going to take into your coaching career, if you like, but it gives you the opportunity, it opens a few doors. And the same with the education, certainly at USW. And yeah, the roles themselves, they're nothing really for me, being out on the grass, being out on the field, coaching, but also coaching alongside other people and listening to what they had to say. And we have not a saying, but something that we talk to about, especially with any new coaches, and that's called be a fool. And what we say to the coaches at that time is, there is always going to be something in football that we don't know. That there will always be something we don't know. And as long as you're open to not knowing something and therefore then learning it, then you're going to be fine. Then you'll always improve, you'll always get better, and you'll always be able to stay with the current trends, be able to stay with the curve that football.
In response to obviously what you've just said, would you agree that for anyone that wants to get into the football coaching industry, that it's important they research things like tactics and things like that in the industry? Because like you was just saying, things are constantly moving within football, aren't they?
Yeah, I would actually say if I was to pick an area that doesn't necessarily need constant research, it would actually probably be tactics, in terms of game management and gameplay, because most clubs will have a philosophy on that themselves, and managers or first team coaches will be the ones that set that philosophy, kind of. So unless you're at that level, tactics not necessarily so much, but certainly things like coaching techniques, certainly things like coaching, including coaching styles and mannerisms, certainly things like the psychology of the group that you're working with, whether that be men, whether that be women, whether that be children, anything like that, absolutely. And just sort of anything around that. If you can get yourself in any analysis courses or lessons where you can like understand match data, things like that, anything to do with nutrition, anything to do with conditioning, strength and conditioning, that sort of work. All of those things for me are things that constantly, not necessarily constantly evolve massively. It might just be tweaks, it might just be changes. But if you're on top of everything and if you know about all that stuff, you automatically elevate yourself to a position whereby people look at you and go, well, I can employ him because regardless of whether or not he has what I want from him right now, I know because of what he's doing, he'll go and learn it and he'll go and understand it. And you're hiring a coach not necessarily for what they know straight off the bat, but for what they outwardly are giving you the impression they're going to go and learn. Can you adapt? Because, for example, otherwise you would have a turnover of coaches every 2 years. If you felt that your coaches were never going to learn something new, then you would have to replace them every so often. For a coach to stay in terms of the longevity in a position or just as a coach, yeah, I think it's really important to be just constantly updating yourself, even if that means that you actually read something and go, well, I don't agree with that, but I know that it's out there. I know that people are doing it, and I have a reason why I don't agree with that. Instead of someone asking you, well, why don't you do this? And you're going, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those things.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a weird comparison to make, I suppose, but obviously within theatre, it's quite the same in some ways in that, you know, they say to get into the industry, if you want to direct and things like that, you have to have opinions on things that have come before, and you have to find things that, you know, you can add your own little thing to it, you know, your own little spin on things. I suppose, I know it's a bit of a weird comparison for me to make there, but I suppose it's quite similar to what you're getting at there.
Yeah, so there are a number of things within the industry, which I'm sure is probably the same with theatre, that are almost like a basic requirement, right? You know that if you allow your players to simply, for example, lift weights, their cardiovascular fitness will never improve if that's the only conditioning they do. So there are certain, whilst football is a game of opinion in a lot of respects, it's only an opinion to a point. There are certain things, you know, in terms of maybe the styles of running that you might use or the way that you might get that cardiovascular fitness out might change and will adapt and evolve. But the fact that you need the cardiovascular fitness it will always be true. That will never not be true. So I imagine, yeah, it's probably quite similar in a few industries where you're essentially looking for the edge most of the time rather than the whole new thing.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to word it, actually. That's a really nice analogy to make. Okay, so obviously I don't want to get you in trouble with your, with Juventus Bahrain or anything like that. But I want to ask you, is there any coach or manager, say in history in the past, that you kind of admire for their style of doing things?
So for me, there are a number of people that I've really liked within football, some of whom have been personal, some of that I've met, and others in general in terms of what they've done in the game, maybe professionally. And I think that starts right out even with my dad and him coaching and him. He had a level 2 FA coaching qualification. A lot of people around him thought he was quite a good coach, but he never pursued it as a career. But for me, for him, there was a couple of things. Firstly was the communication, the way he used to communicate with not just me, but with all of the guys on the team and anyone that he coached. And obviously it was all voluntary. He did that all off his own back, and that meant something to me, that actually someone's prepared to go and do this. The people, this can be a career, but people are also prepared to go and just give up their own time to do it. You don't necessarily see, bin men that are people are just giving up their own time to go and be bin men or to stack shelves, or there are very few people or much less people who are prepared to go and do that. So it gives you an idea of the privileged position you get to be in, to be someone who's paid to do that sort of job. So I massively respect him for that, but also any voluntary coach, great admiration and for that. And that always helps me to understand sort of the position that I get to be in.
Yeah.
The guys that I got to work with initially, I actually mentioned them earlier, Rob and Josh, partly because they really introduced me to what it's like at different levels of coaching. They themselves, they're only, I'm talking about them as if they're 50 years old. They're only, they were fantastic guys, and the way they conducted themselves, the way that they asked me to conduct myself, what they expected of me, and sort of like the basic principles of not necessarily the coaching itself, because I'd already sort of developed a somewhat of a style maybe and a few ideas myself, but what they or the atmosphere that they created within everything that they did was something that I was like, well, it doesn't actually matter what I know, or sorry, to give it a little bit of a different example, the best teacher wasn't necessarily, at school, for example, we both went to secondary school together. Our best teacher, the teacher we liked the most, wasn't necessarily the teacher that knew the most about their subject. It was the teacher that conveyed their message in the right way, that created an atmosphere within the class that allowed for learning to occur. And it's exactly the same with football. Whether or not people, who know Rob and Josh think that they know more about football than anyone else in the world, probably not. Probably, I don't know how we find that one person who knows the most, but what they did was create an atmosphere within the sessions, within the groups, that meant that those guys were always switched on to what they were saying as coaches, and they always took it on board and they improved. And that was always shown by the fact that there was like a feeder system in what we did, and we had a number of kids go up from our level to the next level. In terms of professional coaches, I've been, I don't know if I'm sure it'll be okay. Obviously, I'm a massive Arsenal fan, as you know. So my formative years were under Arsene Wenger at Arsenal, and that style and that philosophy of we're going to keep the ball on the ground, we're going to play through the thirds. And to be fair, he actually changed that philosophy a number of times himself. But essentially the idea, and certainly Spain of the sort of 2010 period, Marco Bielsa's Chile team of just before that. There have been a huge number of teams where I've looked at and admired, and obviously Pep Guardiola even at the moment, regardless of however much money has been spent or
yeah, we'll avoid that. Yeah.
start, you know, there are lots of different things to be admired up and down, even the Premier League right now in Serie A. Obviously, I follow a little bit Serie A now, working with Juventus to make sure that I'm on top of that sort of stuff. There's styles up and down these leagues which are so similar, yet I love the uniqueness of all of them, you know. So to pick out a specific manager from the top level was a little bit more difficult for me than actually from the lower levels, where it's actually easy to see, well, hang on a second, these guys are doing this for free, or these guys are creating this environment, or, you know, all of those different things. We get to work with guys who are like area managers for Juventus. And when they come down and do the sessions, it's a very similar thing whereby kids are engaged and listening no matter what they're doing when they're with that coach. Right, and it's something that I'll try and employ. And there's always great admiration for different reasons. Reasons, it would be impossible to pick and like an absolute favorite, I think.
Yeah, of course. I completely understand. You know where you're coming from. With that. Sorry. Yeah, no, yeah. I get that. Okay, to finish up on them, in your own opinion, this is your own opinion, not your professional opinion. In your own opinion, who is your favorite football player of all time? And I understand this is going to be an extremely difficult question, but if you could choose a football player, who would you choose?
Look, you've got. I'll try and stray. For a different reason, I'm going to try and stray away a little bit from normative answers. Although not that, I'm not certainly going that unique with it. Obviously, for me, if you were to pick a player, to pick any player that I've seen, obviously I'm 23, so relatively recent in terms of viewing experience. Messi, I guess, is head and shoulders above. But for me, in terms of a player that, like, if you were to ask me, you know, who would I want? Who's my favourite? What do I like about them and what they've done? For me, Sergio Busquets is a phenomenal player.
I had a feeling you were going to go for Sergio.
The way that he reads the game and moves himself, positions himself, passes the ball forward. It's really quite something. But also, I had the pleasure really of getting to watch Paolo Maldini for a little bit. In certainly, as I got a little bit older, he was getting on a little bit more. So I didn't get to fully appreciate him necessarily.
Phenomenal player.
I always look towards and someone that when I was playing myself as a defender was like a, you know, if you could be any defender, who would it be? I'd be Paolo Maldini every day of the week, which as an AC Milan legend probably gets me in a bit of trouble.
It's your personal opinion. It's your personal opinion. It's fine. We're stressing that. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic, Dan. Honestly, thank you so much for doing this.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it, mate. Anytime. I mean, I don't know why we would need to do this again. Give me the same answers. But no, anytime you want to call me, that's absolutely fine by me. I've loved it. Thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you, mate. Thank you. And we will just stress before, obviously, we close it, that this interview has been obviously on your own opinions. This is you. Yes. It's not the views of Juventus.
Yeah, this is everything that I've said is my opinion on this, and not the views of Juventus Football Club. We have to stress that, because some people might not like what I say, and then they'll turn around and say, well, this Juventus coach said this. Nothing to do with Juventus. Absolutely nothing other than the fact that I work there.
Target Dan, throw your exit Dan. Don't attack the football club.
It'd be like blaming the FedEx man for sending his post through Royal Mail. Like, don't do it. It's not
fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Dan. Stay safe. Try and enjoy the lockdown as much as you can.
Yeah, I think I've got a jam-packed day today. There's lots of stuff going on. I've got a meal or something to consume at some point.
Exciting.
Yeah, no, like I said, thanks for having me, mate. And
no problem, mate.
At least if nothing else, I enjoyed it. So if that's all we needed, if we needed one, there we go. We've got one.
We'll do it again. I mean, you have lots of opinions on lots of different things. Maybe I'll start a politics segment. That would be interesting. That might get heated.
Yeah, we'll have to stress again. It's not the opinions of Juventus.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you, mate. Take care.
See you later, mate.